Well, it's the 14th of October, and it's time for the 14th film in my 31 Horrors of Mike. We're nearly there at halfway. I can't, nearly there at halfway. We're nearly there at the halfway mark, and I can't believe we've done so many films. We've come so far together. So, anyway, the 14th film is the 2002 release of Dog Soldiers, directed by Neil Marshall. Dog Soldiers sort of came out of nowhere for me. I remember watching it at the time in the cinema, and I was thoroughly impressed and entertained by the film. It's a it's a werewolf movie, which normally doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a high level of quality. There are many werewolf films that are really quite poor. There are only really a handful of werewolf films that are really great, and thankfully this one was great. It surrounds a group of soldiers doing training exercises in the Highlands in Scotland. Anyone who's been to the Highlands in Scotland will know that there's some pretty remote areas, even though we're in quite a small country. We're grossly underpopulated in Scotland, and there's just vast tracts of countryside and mountains and forests and all sorts of stuff up there. So you can imagine as the film goes on how you get this group of soldiers sort of uh, traipsing through the wilderness through the beginning of the film. And while they're there, they're not armed. They've got sort of like guns that shoot blanks and things like that, and they're being told that they need to it's like do sort of orienteering, map reading, and get themselves to a certain place uh, to try. I think it's to try to like outmaneuver another group that are some distance away of soldiers. And what happens is that they find another camp that they weren't aware was there. They decide to take another route, and they find um, that a group of soldiers, special forces soldiers, have actually been wiped out on this little camp. They find one survivor, and they're trying to piece together what's happened. At that point, they find the weapons that are there, so they are armed initially, and they start to realize it gets dark, and then they start to realize that they are in fact being hunted by a group of werewolves. There's some fantastic scenes at this point in the film where they're running through the woods, backtracking, and you see the silhouettes of the werewolves. The werewolves are really reminiscent of the uh, the creatures from the Howling. They're very very tall, slender. They're standing on hind legs, unlike, for example, the werewolf from American Werewolf in London. And there's real excitement as these soldiers are realizing that their guns are sort of slowing the werewolves down, but they're not killing them. They're not sort of doing any sort of damage, and you just see the silhouettes of these creatures between the trees, and it's really well done, really well shot. At that point, they meet a and a local who is driving happens to be driving by in her Land Rover, and she rescues the soldiers. And the only place that they can find that's nearby is this house in the middle of nowhere, this big farmhouse. They hold up in there, and the whole film is basically it's like Aliens, basically, as they try to defend themselves from wave upon wave of attacks from these werewolves, and try to piece together, just what the hell is going on. There's even like a sort of, even though it is a sort of B movie, there's even like a sort of character arc through it, which is quite good, with the lead soldier, um, about how he had sort of failed to get into the special forces, and the reason he'd failed to get into the special forces, it shows you right at the start of the film, is because he um, refused to shoot a dog. And obviously he's then being given the ultimate test, which is to try and shoot werewolves. So the film, I don't want to say anymore because I don't want to ruin it too much. I've described the first 10-15 minutes of the film to you. It's probably too much of a spoiler already, but I was really surprised by this film. First of all, the dynamic with the soldiers is hilarious. They're really, really funny. Um, it's kind of like, you've got all these sort of British soldiers, and they're all from different regions, and they're all sort of just having like squaddy banter with one another. And um, when they're fighting some of the werewolves, like, they show like real guts, real guts. And like just like swearing at them, punching them, just getting in about it, trying to do anything to kill them, and but there's a real comedic element within it as well. But there is also the sort of what I like to call the holy shit factor. When they're in this farmhouse and they're just surrounded by these creatures. It's got a few twists and turns. There is more to it than that. Like I said, I don't want to ruin it for you. It's well shot. The werewolf effects, although you see flashes of the werewolves, but the werewolf effects I think are really well done for such a low budget film. And all in all, I thought the film was just great. I mean, it's a B movie again. I've mentioned it before. It reminds me of like kind of like the same sort of atmosphere in some ways of like Tremors, only a bit darker. It's got that sort of it's just got that sort of B movie feel to it. It feels almost it feels restrained in one way by the budget, but yet just completely exuberant in every other way, and that's what great B movies do. Like they might not have the budget to, because most of this film takes place in the one location, and that's the number one way to save on a budget for a film. So a lot of B movies, especially sort of like B movie horror films, center around like one environment. I talked about Tremors there. It's sort of one kind of environment. Evil Dead, films like that. We talked about another film, House, which I don't think was a big budget film, and it's sort of in one environment. It's the best way to save on your budget. So anyway, Dog Soldiers is just an absolute blast. Very funny. I could understand some people have criticised it. Uh, some audience members from America, because some of the accents are really quite thick in this film. They are very, very British. So, and the stereotypical idea of someone who's British is, so far wide of the mark. It's unreal. Like we all have really different, really, really different accents from one another. And especially when you come up to like where I come from, parts of Scotland, and in the north of England as well, the accent becomes so thick that I think some people have maybe found it a little bit difficult to understand some of the things people are saying. But that doesn't matter really. If you get into it, you should be fine with it. And it's just an absolute blast. I really really love this film, and it really does remind me of Aliens. It feels like Aliens but with werewolves. And does that not sound awesome to you? Sounds awesome to me. So go and check it out. That's Dog Soldiers, and I'll be back tomorrow with another film, I think. Oh well.